So when that happened, Larry Hoover went and got his mother a brand new car. Put King Dave in it, they took him to the hospital.
When David passed away, who stepped into his seat?
Nobody knew that King Dave was gonna die when he died.
David made a deal with Shorty Freeman.
It was in '69 that Larry Hoover became the king of the Gangster Nation.
David told Shorty Freeman, if you flip your mob, if something happened to me, you gonna be the king. So Shorty flipped his mob.
But some people say that Shorty didn't get along with Larry, then some say he did. So that was a long story. I think it could have worked out if Shorty and Larry would have worked together, but people say that Shorty was a little old-fashioned, that he didn't want to change.
Shorty was a Black King Cobra, is that correct?
Right, he was a Cobra, he was King Cobra.
So that was before he became
a disciple.
Can you recall some of the guys that came out after David had transitioned and began to take those higher positions?
Shorty Freeman have been there. You have Killer Red, Sircon Don Swan. You have Junior Hope. You had Greg Knox, which is known as the Crusher. And you also have US from 95th.
It was a lot of branches that were started there because Shorty Freeman, he was the king of the King Cobras.
Okay.
You know, before he hooked up with David.
Okay. King David Barksdale, the Bible, the basement, and the fistfight that founded Chicago's First Street Nation. Cold Open, a basement on the south side of Chicago, early 1960s. The room could hold maybe 150 people. A brother named Charlie Atkins had invited a friend to come check out a meeting. When the friend walked down the stairs, there were 500 people packed into a space built for 150, shoulder to shoulder, like sardines, every one of them a young man from the neighborhood. The friend looked around and thought one word: magic. If a brother from the neighborhood could rally 500 soldiers into one basement, 500 young men who went silent the second the man at the front stood up to speak, that was not a gang. That was something the city had never seen organized before. The man at the front was handsome, built, he spoke powerfully and articulately, and when he talked, 500 hardened young men gave him what the witness described as obedient attention, total silence, total focus. That man was not yet a king. He was a kid from 63rd Street who could outbox anybody in the neighborhood. His name was David Barksdale, and the story of how he turned that basement of 500 into the most powerful street nation in Chicago history, a nation that still stands 60 years later, starts with a Bible, a word that meant to help people, and a fistfight that decided who would lead. This is the founding. Everything else in Chicago comes after this. Beat 2. The Bible. Before it was a gang, before it was even a mob, it was a drum and bugle corps. That is the detail that gets lost in every retelling. The men who were actually there, the elders who lived it and sat down decades later to correct the record, are consistent about the beginning. It started as a group of young men trying to protect the neighborhood. Two brothers, Bobby and Laverne Longstreet, were a little older than the rest. Bobby carried a Bible. He read it constantly.
One day, Bobby looked up from the Bible and said, "You know what? We are going to call ourselves disciples. We are going to help the neighborhood. We are going to help the people in the neighborhood so it will not be like this."
That was the origin of the name, not a threat, not a claim on territory. A biblical word chosen by a young man who read scripture and wanted to organize the neighborhood around protecting the people in it. D from the knee, love from the heart, treat the elderly with respect, help the people if you can. That was the founding philosophy spoken in the actual words of the men who built it. The neighborhood needed it. This was the 1960s. The civil rights movement was being televised for the first time. There were corrupt police officers coming into the community, either handing people the bag or taking the tax off the bag. The community was looking to these young men to secure it, because the institutions that were supposed to were not. Free breakfast programs, social programs, roller skating, dances. The Black Panthers were doing it. The Blackstone Rangers were doing it. The Vice Lords were doing it. And on the south side, the Disciples were doing it. The word disciple meant something specific at the beginning. It meant help. It would not stay that way. Beat 3. The Cobras. To understand the Disciples, you have to understand what came before them, and what came before almost everything on the south side was the Cobras.
The elders are emphatic about this. If you go to the board of the Gangster Disciples today, most of them will tell you they came up as Cobras. Charlie Atkins was a Cobra, Laverne Longstreet was a Cobra, Shorty Freeman was a King Cobra, Boone Black was a Cobra. Most of the men who would eventually be called Disciples came out of the Cobra Nation first.
The Cobras started in North Lawndale, K-Town, all the way to Cicero, the largest street organization in Chicago at the time. And the reason they stopped being the largest is a detail that says everything about that era. Back then, when you turned 18 or 19, you left the game. You went and got a job. There were no grants yet, no funding streams making the street life look attractive the way the government money later did for other organizations. So the Cobras aged out. Their members turned 18 and walked away into regular life. Geography scattered them further. When the city built the University of Illinois and tore down Jewtown, the people who lived there moved to Englewood, because Englewood was open at the time. When they started tearing down the Dan Ryan corridor, the people living there moved to Englewood too. That migration is how Englewood became Inglewood, and it is how the Cobras, fractured and scattered, seeded the ground that David Barksdale would organize into something entirely new. Laverne Longstreet moved to Englewood and started the 6 Trey Cobras, East Side Cobras, West Side Cobras. The pieces were on the board.
That was started there because Shorty Freeman, he was the king of the King Cobras.
Okay.
You know, before he hooked up with David. That's
Okay.
what Shorty was. Shorty was King Cobra. There's so many GDs now. Yeah. When you trace them back, they come from the Cobras.
Okay.
We was 6th Street, Cobras, because we come up 6th Street. So, and Didi, Rich is Cobra.
Right.
You know, so we were 6th Street Cobra, and plus Cobras always have been allies to the Disciples.
Right.
You know, so fell in place. And we were 6th Street Cobras for a minute, but by Larry being a natural leader, Cobras cool. All the street organization cool, because they've been asking us for years why we didn't hook up with this and that. But we was the new generation, everybody want to do their own thing.
All of them, everybody was Cobra. Most of the stuff that, when you say Disciples, they come from the Cobras.
And let me say this too about Didi. Through the years, after we set up the board and everything, everybody used to ask me why Didi wasn't a board member. It's a lot of them, originals, not a board member.
Right.
Because what they represent to the organization, it ranks so much higher than a board member. They don't need a title.
Matter of fact, if you go to the board of the
They just needed someone to unify them.
Beat 4. The Devil Disciples. The name Disciples came first. The name Devil Disciples came out of a split. Charlie Atkins was the leader when David Barksdale was still just a kid. And when David was locked up in the Illinois Youth Commission early on. Atkins had ambition, and he had resentment, because he knew that when it came to speaking, when it came to who the younger men actually looked to, David was the real leader, even from inside. David was the toughest and the baddest. Whoever could outbox anybody was who led, and that was David.
We are going to pull away from y'all, and we are not going to call ourselves the Disciples anymore. We are going to call ourselves the Devil Disciples.
A lot of the young men did not go for that name. When you put devil on it, it meant the opposite of what Bobby Longstreet had opened his Bible to. It meant renegade, bad spirit. It meant they were losing the meaning of the word disciple, the meaning that was about helping people. Men like Kilroy, Roy Dawson, and Mickey Jenkins got into it with Charlie over the name. They wanted to go back to just disciples, but Charlie was the leader at the time, so it stuck for a while. The genesis of the name Devil Disciples was that basement, that crowded room. That was where it was born. A group becoming a mob, becoming a gang, all in the space of a few years, all under a name that half of them did not want. Beat 5. The Fistfight. The leadership question was settled the way it was always settled in that neighborhood in that era. Not with guns, with fists. The literature of the Disciples names 3 kings at the founding: Charlie Atkins, Laverne Longstreet, and David Barksdale. Longstreet and Atkins were Cobras. David Barksdale was a day Viking from 63rd Street. 3 men, 3 origins, 1 nation trying to form. When David came home and the argument over the name and the leadership came to a head, David beat up Charlie Atkins. That is the account, stated plainly by the men who were there. David beat him up, and that is how David got the disciples. That is how he got the 6 stray disciples. Once David beat him up, David became the leader. Charlie fled, and David was a different kind of leader than Charlie had been. More aggressive, one of the real ones, nothing to play with. But, and this is the part the elders insist on, the aggression was in service of the original idea. Under King David, it was about the people, the community, the families, and harmony. They did not steal from each other. They did not fight each other without permission. They refused to let people come into their communities and steal or rob or hurt the residents. David had the power to command rebellious spirits. That is what made him King David. He could take the homeless and give them a home. He uplifted the room when he walked into it. He was, by every account from men who both loved and feared him, egotistical and hard and genuinely for righteousness all at the same time. He was a guy you wanted to be around, and he was nothing to play with. Both things were true. Beat 6. What David built by the mid-1960s, David Barksdale had turned that basement into an actual organization. The Disciples registered. Legitimately. A man named Michael Shane, an older figure connected to Jesse Jackson's circle, a man who moved in the world of the Cosmopolitan Chamber of Commerce, taught David how to address himself, how to talk to people, how to build a legitimate organization out of a street following. The first charter they held was in the Black Disciples' name. They incorporated. They had a paper structure. 4 and 5 different organizations now pushing toward the same goal. And the goal, at this stage, still looked like the community. St. Stephen's Church on Harold Baskin Street, the parish run by a white preacher who agreed to let the young men use it as long as they took care of it. They put on a play there about the Blackstone Rangers and the Disciples. They held meetings. They fed people. They ran educational programs. They danced and roller skated, and, in the words of one of the founders, they grew up there. Mayor Daley's machine was funding it. The city gave money to David's programs, gave money to Jeff Fort's programs, gave money to the Vice Lord's programs, all at the same time, because in the 1960s, these were community organizations connecting young people to jobs and keeping them off the street. Nobody was a renegade yet. The televised civil rights movement had these young men thinking of themselves as Black revolutionary soul brothers. The word black went in front of everything. Black Panthers, Black Peace Stone Nation, Black Disciples. David Barksdale had built the largest, most organized force on the South Side. And across Halsted Street, a smaller, newer organization was watching him and deciding it would not be swallowed. Beat 7. The Supreme Gangsters across Halsted. On the other side of Halsted Street, a group of teenagers was making noise. They called themselves the Supreme Gangsters. They came up around 68th and Peoria, 68th and Halsted. They were younger than the Disciples and there were fewer of them, but they held their ground. The Disciples were the much larger, much more powerful organization, and they were interested in expanding, because that is the mentality of an organizer. The more people you have, the more influence, the more political power you have. The Disciples looked across Halsted and saw territory. The Supreme Gangsters refused to be absorbed. Their leader was a natural, a kid who had come up through the Cobras like so many others. 68th Street was Cobra ground, and who had the specific quality of leadership that makes men follow without being asked twice. His name was Larry Hoover. The two organizations went to war. The Disciples and the Supreme Gangsters shot at each other across Halsted Street. The Supreme Gangsters had killed one of the Disciples' friends, a man named Solomon. There was blood between them before there was ever any conversation about unity. As one elder put it, watching those little dudes fight back so hard, the way they moved, they acted like gangsters. And it stuck. Supreme Gents became Supreme Gangsters. David Barksdale had a war on his hands with the crew directly across the street. What he did not yet know was that the leader of that crew would one day stand next to him and be crowned a king of the same nation. Beat 8. The pieces on the board. By the late 1960s, the full map of what would become Chicago's street nations was almost set. David Barksdale had the Disciples. the largest force on the South Side, incorporated, funded, running community programs, and expanding. Larry Hoover had the Supreme Gangsters across Halsted, small but unbreakable. On the east side, Jeff Fort was building the Blackstone Rangers into a machine that would become the biggest thing in the city. Tight, regimental, economically in tune, sanctioning which stores could even operate in their territory. And underneath all of it, the Cobra Nation that most of these men had come up in was still seeding new sets across the South Side. The elders describe this period as the ideal generation. Jeff Fort and David Barksdale were, for lack of a better phrase, the next generation of black organization. Young men who could command thousands, who ran breakfast programs and peace treaties, who had politicians in their circle and the loyalty of entire neighborhoods. When Dr. King was killed and the riots came to Chicago, David and Jeff could each put a curfew on their thousands of members and the shooting would stop. That is leadership. That is the level these men operated at, before the drugs came and rewrote everything. David Barksdale founded it. A Bible gave it its name. A basement of 500 proved its power. A fistfight decided its king. And the community was the mission. Genuinely, verifiably, in the words of the men who were in the room. The war with Larry Hoover across Halsted was still active. But the idea that was about to change Chicago forever, the merge, was already forming in the minds of men who could see that two nations at war on the same South Side made less sense than one nation that controlled all of it. That is the next chapter. Beat 9. Human weight. Here is what the founding of the Black Disciples adds up to. A young man named Bobby Longstreet opened a Bible and chose a word that meant to help people. A drum and bugle corps became a movement. A neighborhood that the police were taxing and the city was neglecting produced its own protectors because nobody else was going to protect it. That is the origin, not the mythology. The documented on-camera testimony of the men who were teenagers in that basement and are now elders trying to correct 60 years of distortion. David Barksdale was hard. He was egotistical, he could command rebellious spirits, and he could beat any man in the neighborhood, and he used both of those things to take the leadership by force when Charlie Atkins tried to split the club. But the men who followed him, men who both loved him and were a little afraid of him, are unanimous that under King David it was about the people, the families, the harmony, no stealing from each other, no preying on the community. The word disciple meant something, and David enforced the meaning. What none of them could see coming was the drugs. Every single elder in these accounts arrives at the same turning point. It was community organization until the dope game came into play, and then it changed everything. The vices came in, the money got too good, the leaders got locked up or got high, and the thing that was built to protect the community became the thing that hollowed it out. But that is later. At the founding, it was a Bible, a basement of 500, and a fistfight that made a king. David Barksdale built the first one. Everyone else, Larry Hoover, Jeff Fort, every nation that came after, built on the ground he organized first. We the mob, drop your verdict in the comments. Did the founders lose control of what they built? Or was the community mission always going to get swallowed the moment the money got big enough? Like the video. Subscribe. The vault keeps building.